And we're continuing now to follow the latest developments following Britain's historic vote to leave the European Union and the resignation, of course, of British Prime Minister David Cameron. And to discuss it all, we do want to welcome Errol Barnett. He is the newest addition to CBS News, making his maiden telegenic voyage from our Washington bureau. Errol, welcome to the Ball Club. It's great to have you, especially with regard to this. You covered the 2014 election in the UK from London. This vote, then, that has sent shockwaves across Europe, it actually has been a decision years in the making. Take us back then to 2013.
Well, Josh, good morning. Great to see you. One of the things I remember from covering the elections in 2014 is that, as is true in this situation, the polls got it completely wrong. They predicted at that time a close divide between Labour and Conservative Party votes, and what ended up in the outcome was that it was a blowout for Conservatives. This time around, if you take a look at what was covered in the media, if what the online betting sites were reporting, and even what the banks had already factored in, people were betting that the UK would vote to remain as part of the EU. And I've been taking a look at some of the polls to kind of parse exactly how they got it wrong. And it seems that they underestimated, by large part, this massive amount of Euroscepticism that exists all over the UK. This sentiment and belief that the status quo remaining as part of the EU post-2008 financial recession actually isn't what's best for the working class, those who aren't earning in real terms what they were years ago. And so if you look at YouGov.com, for example, they had online polls that up to the last hour seemed to show this last minute of surge of support for those who wanted to leave the EU. So overall, you could say that this decision came down to, I would say, 3 F's: a frustration over the economy, a fear of what continued immigration would do to many people's bottom line, and a failure, Josh, in the part of Parliament to really address the concerns of the working class and convince people that they are better off as staying part of the EU. So the fact that the polls were wrong in 2014 and that now we've seen the polls again incorrectly predict that the UK would vote to remain as part of the European bloc really speaks to this Euroscepticism and this deep vein of fear and anger among many in the British electorate.
And as you mentioned, when British bookmakers are surprised, you know that it was truly shocking, this result. However, especially as it regards David Cameron specifically, again, who has resigned, taking this as a referendum on his leadership, if nothing else, it also bears mentioning that the seeds of this were planted by Cameron himself, as he in fact looked to marginalize the UKIP. And as he bet big, if you will, he certainly has now lost big.
Oh, that's absolutely true. Prime Minister Cameron made a bet and lost. And in 2014, when it was evident that the Conservatives had much more widespread support than they expected, something else happened. The SNP, the Scottish National Party, also gained in Parliament seats. And we should note that they, in this vote, chose to remain as part of the EU. So it remains to be determined what will happen on that front. But another smaller fringe party at the time, as you mentioned, UKIP, the UK Independence Party, gained in popularity. So that was our first indication in 2014 that there was this deep undercurrent of resentment toward the status quo. It is very similar, many believe, to what we're seeing take place in the United States right now with Donald Trump and his supporters through the Republican nomination process, and now he is the presumptive Republican nominee. That is because of a miscalculation of the deep resentment many Republicans felt towards the establishment. The same thing was happening in the UK, and Prime Minister David Cameron didn't address those concerns enough. He made a bet that, hey, let's quiet. The quote from David Cameron was, let's stop banging on about leaving Europe. And that's why he brought this referendum forward. And now we see the result. Many believe he's right to step down. There is not a lot of confidence in what he can do. But as you note, as we look at the markets, not just in Europe, but around the world, there's massive uncertainty about what comes next, who comes next, and what the right solution could be. When you take a look at what's happening in the European Union as a whole, they want this to happen quickly. Jean-Claude Juncker saying he wants to negotiate swiftly with the UK and determine how they want to have new terms with the bloc. But you have far right-wing parties in France, in the Netherlands, who are already emboldened by this and saying we want a similar in-out vote as well.
We could see a precipitousness there, exponential to a degree. And as you mentioned, again, that it's impossible to see this populist decision not through the American context, certainly, and the great deal of dissatisfaction that we've seen from supporters, not just of Donald Trump, but really on the other side, from Bernie Sanders as well. It is now left to you, again, in your first appearance with us, to what to make of the now very complicated legacy of David Cameron.
Well, he has. Many will say that David Cameron oversaw a decline of British influence, not just in the European bloc, but around the world. Many are dissatisfied with his leadership and his stewardship of the economy in many ways because of a disconnect with the working class and an inability to really install confidence. It's that third F I mentioned, the failure on part of government to convince the electorate that the status quo, that continuing to trust in him, continuing to trust in the Conservative Party would benefit them. They are now in a situation where they will have to select a new leader. It's unclear exactly who that will be because Conservatives themselves were split among remaining as part of the UK or Brexiting, as we've called it. And there's just one other note I would just want to reference as we talk about why this all happened. You talk about Bernie Sanders here in the United States. When you look at the poll numbers and extrapolate who voted for what, older voters leaned towards a Brexit. Younger voters overwhelmingly wanted to remain. So a lot of what people are saying on social media right now is that once again, young people will have to deal with the consequences of what the older people have decided. It's just quite a fascinating aspect of what has been such a shocking, 12 hours now?
Yeah, a frontier really not conceived of. David Cameron called, in one thing I read today, underinformed and overconfident, and of course now out of a job, really, and it was his own making. Errol Barnett, it is a pleasure to welcome you to CBS News. We very much appreciate the insights today.
Thank you, sir.